He never thought that a mere servant could alter the course of his life. But one night, while searching for his missing son in the vast halls of the Palace of Thebes, he found her in a secluded corner, teaching him to dance. Her movements were neither clumsy nor those of a maid, but of someone who had once belonged to a far more exalted world. Intrigued, the pharaoh resolved to uncover her secret, unaware that in doing so he would unearth a hidden past, a truth that would challenge the court, the gods, and above all, his own heart. The evening air hung heavy with the scent of lotus blossoms as Pharaoh Amenhotep IV stood at the edge of the royal gardens, his tall figure silhouetted against the warm glow of oil lamps. His golden collar caught the flickering light, casting prism-like reflections across his broad shoulders. He hadn't planned to attend this celebration. The harvest festival always brought too many people seeking favors, but something had drawn him from his private chambers tonight. "My lord," whispered Amun-Ra, his most trusted advisor, "your presence honors us, though unexpected." Amenhotep nodded absently, his kohl-rimmed eyes scanning the crowd. Musicians played their harps and flutes near the central fountain, where dancers moved like reeds in the breeze. The court officials circled about, their laughter rising and falling with the cadence of practiced politics. "Where is my son?" he asked, his deep voice barely audible above the music. Amun-Ra hesitated. "The prince was here earlier, your majesty. Perhaps he—" Amenhotep raised his hand, silencing the advisor mid-sentence. There, between two date palms strung with tiny silver bells, was Prince Neferu, but it wasn't his son who had caught his attention. It was the woman dancing with him. She moved unlike the others, not with the careful, measured steps of court dancers, but with a fluid grace that seemed almost impossible. Her simple white dress, marked only by a thin blue ribbon at the waist, suggested she was a servant. Yet the way she carried herself, the perfect poise of her neck, the subtle command in each gesture of her delicate hands, these belonged to someone raised in a palace, not someone who swept its floors. "Who is she?" Amenhotep asked, feeling something stir within him that he hadn't felt since before his wife's passing 3 seasons ago. "I believe," Amun-Ra said, his voice careful, "that is Nile. She serves in the eastern wing, attending to the visiting dignitaries' quarters." Prince Neferu was laughing, a sound Amenhotep realized he hadn't heard in months. His son, normally so conscious of his position, had dropped all pretense of royal detachment. He was simply a young man, enchanted by a beautiful woman. "She dances as though the gods themselves guide her feet," Amenhotep murmured. "Perhaps too well for her station," Amun-Ra replied, a note of warning in his voice. The pharaoh turned to his advisor. "What do you know of her?" "Little, my lord. She arrived with a caravan from the southern provinces last season, came with good recommendations from a minor temple. She keeps to herself, performs her duties without complaint." Amun-Ra paused, "Though there have been whispers. The other servants say she speaks like someone educated. They've caught her reading scrolls in the library when she thought no one was watching. Some have heard her speaking in foreign tongues to the ambassadors." Amenhotep watched as Nile spun in a perfect circle, her bare feet barely seeming to touch the cool marble tiles. Prince Neferu attempted to match her movements, his usual dignity abandoned in favor of joy. "My son seems quite taken with her," Amenhotep observed. "Yes, your majesty, it has been noticed." Amun-Ra's tone conveyed everything his diplomatic words did not. A servant girl approached, bowing low. "Wine for the living god," she offered, presenting a golden cup with trembling hands. Amenhotep took it without looking, his eyes still fixed on the dancing pair. When he finally sipped the sweet date wine, he found it bitter on his tongue. "Tomorrow," he said finally, "I want to know everything about this girl, where she came from, who her family is, how she learned to dance like that." He gestured toward Nile with his cup. "No servant moves with such knowledge." "As you command, Divine One." The music changed to a faster rhythm, and now others joined the dance. Nile and Neferu were separated by the crowd, and Amenhotep felt an inexplicable relief. Then, as if sensing his gaze, the woman looked up. Across the garden, through the crowd of nobles and servants, their eyes met. She did not look away as a servant should. She did not bow her head in deference. Instead, for the briefest moment, she looked directly at him with eyes the color of the Nile at dawn. Then, as quickly as it had happened, she dropped her gaze and melted into the crowd. "Tomorrow," Amenhotep repeated, setting down his wine untouched. "I want answers tomorrow." As he turned to leave, he felt a strange sensation, like the brush of falcon wings against his heart. Something about this woman had awakened his curiosity, and perhaps something more, something he didn't dare name. Behind him, the music continued, and somewhere in that garden his son laughed again with a servant girl who moved like royalty. Amenhotep knew he would not sleep well tonight. Images of the dance would follow him into his dreams, and when he woke, the first word on his lips would be her name, Nile. Who was she, and why did he feel as though the answer to that question might change everything? The morning sun streamed through alabaster screens, casting honeycomb patterns across Amenhotep's private chamber. He sat alone on a low ebony chair, staring at the papyrus scroll in his hands, without truly seeing the carefully painted hieroglyphs. His mind was elsewhere, still caught in the garden with the mysterious servant and her impossible grace. A sharp rap at the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Enter," he commanded, quickly rolling the scroll and setting it aside. The heavy cedar doors swung open to reveal the imposing figure of Queen Tiye, his mother, and the great royal wife of his father. Though years had lined her face, she remained as formidable as the day she had first taken the throne beside Amenhotep III. Her wig was adorned with gold beads that clicked softly as she moved, and her eyes, sharp as obsidian daggers, missed nothing. "My son," she said, her voice neither warm nor cold, simply authoritative. "You left the celebration early." It wasn't a question, but Amenhotep answered anyway. "I had matters to consider." "Indeed." She settled onto a cushioned stool across from him, arranging her pleated linen gown with practiced precision. "As do we all. The Hittite ambassador awaits your answer. He has been most patient." Amenhotep suppressed a sigh. "This conversation again. Mother, the Princess Tiare is a jewel among women," Queen Tiye continued as if he hadn't spoken. "Beautiful, educated in the ways of court, and, most importantly, her father commands the largest army north of our borders. I am aware of Princess Tiare's many virtues. You have listed them often enough to fill the Book of the Dead twice over." His mother's expression didn't change, but her fingers tensed slightly against the fabric of her gown, the only sign his words had struck a nerve. "You speak carelessly of sacred texts," she chided. "Perhaps that is why the gods have not blessed you with clarity on this matter. Egypt needs this alliance, Amenhotep. The northern tribes grow restless, and the treasuries are not as full as in your father's time." Amenhotep stood abruptly, walking to the window that overlooked the Nile. Boats dotted the sacred river, fishermen casting their nets in the morning light. How simple their lives seemed compared to his. "I have ruled for 4 years without a great royal wife," he said. "Egypt has prospered. Egypt has survived," his mother corrected. "But for how long? The people whisper that the gods are displeased. The priests of Amun grow more demanding with each passing season. A royal wedding would bring celebration, gifts from foreign powers, and renewed faith in your dynasty." Amenhotep closed his eyes briefly. "And what of my faith, mother? What of my happiness?" Queen Tiye rose, her jewelry tinkling like distant bells. She approached her son and, in a rare gesture of affection, placed her hand on his arm. "Happiness," she repeated, her voice softening slightly. "Oh, my son, kings don't marry for happiness. They marry for Egypt." A servant appeared at the doorway, bowing low. "Forgive the interruption, Divine One. The High Priest of Amun requests an audience." "Tell him I will receive him shortly," Amenhotep said, grateful for the interruption. His mother's hand fell away from his arm. "I will leave you to your duties," she said. "But remember, the Hittite king won't wait forever. Princess Tiye has other suitors. None as attractive as the Pharaoh of Egypt, I'm sure," Amenhotep replied dryly. A ghost of a smile touched Queen Tiye's lips. "Indeed not. But even a pharaoh can be refused if he hesitates too long." She moved toward the door, then paused. "The council meets at midday. They expect your decision." After she left, Amenhotep remained at the window, watching a falcon circle high above the river. Free, he thought. What would it be like to be so free? Unbidden, the image of Nile dancing in the moonlight rose in his mind. There had been freedom in her movements, a joy that seemed to transcend the constraints of court and position. "Your Majesty?" Amun-Ra's voice interrupted his thoughts. "I have the information you requested." Amenhotep turned, suddenly alert. "Tell me." His advisor produced a small scroll. "About the servant girl, Nile. As you suspected, her story raises questions." For the first time that day, Amenhotep felt his spirits lift. "Go on." As Amun-Ra began to speak, Amenhotep found himself listening with an intensity that surprised even him. The council meeting and Princess Tiye could wait. There were more pressing mysteries to unravel. and as the falcon continued its graceful circles above the ancient river, Amenhotep felt something stir within him, something that felt dangerously close to hope. Hope for what? He couldn't yet say. But as the sun climbed higher in the Egyptian sky, casting its golden light across the land he ruled, Amenhotep made a silent promise to himself. Whatever else might come to pass, Princess Tiara would not have his answer today. The great royal wife would have to wait. First, he needed to understand why a simple servant had captured not only his son's attention, but his own as well. The royal barge cut through the sacred Nile waters like a knife through linen, its gold-tipped oars rising and falling in perfect unison. Amenhotep stood beneath the purple canopy, his ceremonial headdress heavy upon his brow, as he watched the western shore glide past. The Temple of Hathor loomed ahead, its massive columns reaching skyward like the fingers of a stone giant. "Your Majesty seems distracted," Vizier Ai observed, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. Amenhotep glanced at his father's old friend. "Do I? Perhaps it's the weight of godhood, Ai. It grows heavier with each passing year." The vizier's lips twitched slightly, the closest he ever came to smiling. "Indeed, Divine One, though I suspect there might be another weight upon your mind." Before Amenhotep could respond, the barge bumped gently against the temple's dock. Priests lined the stone steps, their shaved heads gleaming in the afternoon sun, white robes perfectly pressed and identical in every way. At their head stood Meriptah, high priest of Hathor, his leopard skin cape marking his elevated status. "Welcome, living Horus," Meriptah called, bowing deeply. "The goddess awaits your presence." The formalities of disembarking and processing into the temple passed in a blur for Amenhotep. His body moved through the familiar rituals, while his mind wandered elsewhere, to the scroll Amon-Ra had presented him that morning, the scroll that told a most curious tale about a servant named Nile. "Your offering pleases the goddess," Meriptah intoned, as Amenhotep placed a golden figurine at the feet of Hathor's statue. "She blesses your reign with prosperity and joy. If only the goddess could bless me with answers," Amenhotep murmured. The high priest tilted his head slightly. "Perhaps she already has, Great One. One must simply know where to look." As the incense smoke curled around the painted columns, Amenhotep found himself alone with Meriptah in the inner sanctuary, the other priests having withdrawn to prepare the next ritual. "You've served in this temple for many years," Amenhotep said, watching the old priest's face carefully. "Since before your revered father took the throne," Meriptah confirmed. "These stones have been my home for nearly 6 decades. Then perhaps you might recognize a description." Amenhotep kept his tone casual. "A woman of about 20 summers, graceful as a reed in the wind, eyes the color of the Nile at dawn, speaks several languages, and moves with the bearing of someone born to palaces, not service." Meriptah's hands, which had been adjusting an offering bowl, went still, just for a moment, but long enough. "Many women pass through these halls, Divine One. The temples train hundreds of dancers for sacred rituals. This one would be memorable," Amenhotep pressed. "She arrived in Thebes last season with recommendations supposedly from a temple in the south." The high priest's eyes darted briefly to a shadowed doorway before returning to Amenhotep's face. "I cannot recall such a person, though my memory is not what it once was." Amenhotep took a step closer, lowering his voice. "Amon-Ra's investigation revealed that no such recommendations exist, at least not from any temple that admits to issuing them." Sweat beaded on Meriptah's brow despite the temple's cool interior. "Perhaps there was a mistake in the records." "Perhaps," Amenhotep agreed. "Or perhaps there is more to this servant girl than meets the eye. She reads Meriptah. She slips into my library when she thinks no one is watching, and reads texts that even some of my scribes struggle to understand. She dances with a technique taught only in the most sacred temples. She speaks to foreign ambassadors in their own tongues without translators." The high priest's shoulders sagged slightly. He glanced toward the statue of Hathor, as if seeking guidance from the goddess herself. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "some secrets are buried for good reason. Like scarabs beneath the sand, they serve their purpose best in darkness. I am the morning and evening star," Amenhotep replied, steel entering his voice. "There are no secrets in my kingdom that I do not have the right to unearth." Meriptah sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 70 years. "Not here," he murmured. "After the ceremony, come to the Garden of Remembrance, alone." The remainder of the temple visit passed in a haze of ritual and recitation. Amenhotep moved through the ceremonies mechanically, his mind racing ahead to the garden and whatever revelation awaited him there. When at last he stood among the flowering tamarisk trees, their delicate pink blossoms drifting down like snow upon the stone benches, Merimta approached from a hidden path. "What I tell you cannot leave this garden," the priest said without preamble. "Lives depend upon it, perhaps even the girls." "You have my word," Amenhotep promised. Merimta sat heavily upon a bench, gesturing for the pharaoh to join him, a shocking breach of protocol that Amenhotep allowed out of curiosity. 15 years ago, the priest began, a high-ranking priest of Amun named Senenmut fell in love with a Mitanni princess who had been sent to strengthen diplomatic ties between our kingdoms. Their love was forbidden, of course. She was intended as a minor wife for your father. Amenhotep nodded. He vaguely remembered such a princess arriving at court, though he had been a child at the time. "They met in secret for months," Merimta continued. "When she became with child, your father was away on campaign. She and Senenmut fled the palace, spreading word that she had fallen ill and died during the night. But she lived," Amenhotep guessed. "For 5 more years, they hid in the southern provinces, raising their daughter in secret. When the princess truly did pass to the field of reeds, Senenmut placed the child in the temple of Isis, where she was raised and educated as a priestess in training." "Nile," Amenhotep breathed. Merimta nodded. "Her real name is Nefertari, beautiful companion. She was raised in sacred knowledge, trained in all the arts befitting her dual heritage. But as she grew, her resemblance to her mother became unmistakable. Anyone who had known the Mitanni princess would recognize her daughter immediately. So her father sent her away," Amenhotep concluded. "Not by choice. There was an incident. A visiting noble from your father's court recognized her. Senenmut was exposed and executed for his crime of stealing a royal bride." Merimta's voice quavered. "Before he died, he begged me, his oldest friend, to protect his daughter." "By placing her as a servant in my household?" Amenhotep asked incredulously. "That hardly seems like protection. Where better to hide than in plain sight? As a lowly servant, no one would look closely at her. She could remain invisible until arrangements could be made to send her safely back to her mother's people." Amenhotep stood, pacing the narrow garden path. "Why are you telling me this now?" Merimta looked up, his eyes suddenly sharp. "Because she is in danger, Your Majesty. Someone else has recognized her. Someone who once desired her mother and was denied. He has been watching her, waiting for proof of her identity." "Who?" The high priest shook his head. "I dare not say even here. But know this. If her identity is revealed publicly, it will create a diplomatic crisis. The Mitanni would demand her return, or worse, claim she was kidnapped and use it as pretext for war." Amenhotep felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "And if I were to simply send her away now, back to her mother's people quietly?" "It may already be too late," Merimta whispered. "She has caught too many eyes. Your sons, yours." He hesitated. "And she is not merely of royal blood, Amenhotep. She is of divine lineage on both sides. Such a woman. Prophecies have been spoken about such a union." "Prophecies?" Amenhotep frowned. "What prophecies?" But Merimta rose, adjusting his leopard skin cloak. "Your entourage will be looking for you, Divine One. We have already spoken too long." As the old priest turned to leave, Amenhotep caught his arm. "One last question. Does she know? Does Nile know who she truly is?" Merimta's expression softened with something like sorrow. "She knows only fragments. For her protection, we kept much from her. How could we tell her that her father died screaming her name, begging for her safety with his last breath?" The priest gently removed the pharaoh's hand from his arm. "What you do with this knowledge is now your burden to bear, morning and evening star. But remember, sometimes the brightest flame casts the darkest shadow." As Amenhotep stood alone in the garden, petals continuing to fall like pink tears around him, he realized his simple curiosity had uncovered something far more dangerous than he could have imagined. A servant who was no servant, a dancer with royal blood, a woman whose very existence threatened the delicate balance of power along the Nile, and somehow, impossibly, the woman who had begun to haunt his thoughts day and night. What was he to do with such dangerous knowledge? And why, despite every rational argument against it, did he feel an overwhelming urge to seek her out, to look once more into those dawn-colored eyes and see her for who she truly was? The royal gardens lay silent under the silver light of a crescent moon. Amenhotep dismissed his guards at the entrance, needing solitude after the weight of revelations from the Temple of Hathor. He walked alone through the pomegranate trees, their low-hanging fruit like dark hearts against the night sky, until he came to the small artificial lake at the garden's center. He hadn't expected anyone else to be there at this late hour, but she was. Nefertari, daughter of a forbidden union, knelt at the water's edge, her hands cupped before her as she made a small offering to the moon's reflection. Lotus blossoms floated on the still surface, their white petals luminous in the darkness. She wore a simple servant's dress, yet even in such modest garments, there was an unmistakable nobility in the line of her neck, the curve of her shoulders. Amenhotep knew he should leave. After what Meripta had told him, any interaction with this woman was dangerous, yet his feet carried him forward until his shadow fell across the water. She turned, startled, then immediately prostrated herself on the cool stone pavement. "My pharaoh, forgive me, I didn't—" "Rise," he said, his voice gentler than he'd intended. "You've done nothing requiring forgiveness." She stood, keeping her eyes downcast as proper for a servant, though he had already seen what those eyes held. Intelligence, depth, and secrets she herself might not fully understand. "The gardens are open to all who serve in the palace," he continued, taking a step closer. "Even at this hour. Thank you, Divine One." Her voice was soft but clear, like temple bells in the distance. "I often come here when I cannot sleep. The water, it reminds me of somewhere I once belonged. The Southern Temple," Amenhotep thought, or perhaps even earlier memories of a home beside the Nile, where a disgraced priest and a foreign princess had briefly found happiness. "What troubles your sleep?" he asked, though he had no right to such personal questions. She hesitated, clearly surprised by his interest. "Dreams, Your Majesty. Always the same dream." "Tell me," he urged, gesturing to a stone bench nearby. After a moment's hesitation, she sat at the very edge, maintaining a respectful distance as he settled beside her. The scent of jasmine clung to her skin, subtle and intoxicating. "I dream of music I've never heard," she began, her voice taking on a dreamlike quality. "A palace I've never seen, with walls painted blue as lapis. There's a man with kind eyes who holds me up to the stars, naming constellations in a language I almost understand." She paused. "And a woman who sings me to sleep with songs about mountains covered in snow, though I've never seen mountains or snow." Her father and mother, Amenhotep realized, fragments of earliest childhood memory, preserved like insects in amber. "Sometimes dreams are echoes of lives we've forgotten," he said carefully, "or perhaps lives that were taken from us." Her head lifted slightly, and for a fleeting moment her eyes met his directly. In them he saw a flash of something, recognition or perhaps hope. "Have you ever felt that, Divine One? As though you were meant for a different life than the one fate gave you?" The question struck him like a physical blow. How many nights had he lain awake, crushed beneath the weight of divine expectations, longing for a simpler existence? "Yes," he admitted softly. "Though it does not become a god-king to say so." A small smile touched her lips. "Then I shall keep your secret as the night keeps ours. Our secret." The simple phrase sent a ripple of warmth through him that had nothing to do with the mild evening air. From a distant corner of the garden came the sound of Prince Neferu's laughter, followed by the giggles of several young nobles. The evening's festivities continued elsewhere, but here, beside this quiet pool, time seemed suspended. "My son speaks highly of you," Amenhotep said, watching her face carefully. A blush colored her cheeks. "The prince is kind to all who serve him, not as kind as he is to you." Amenhotep studied the moon's reflection in the water. "He seeks your company often. We share an interest in poetry," she explained, then added hastily, "He reads, I listen. It would not be my place to reveal that you can not only read, but write poetry in 3 languages." Amenhotep finished for her. She went very still, like a gazelle sensing a predator. "Your Majesty, It's all right," he said gently. "Your secret is safe with me." "Which secret?" she whispered, and in those 2 words, he heard her true question. "How much do you know?" Amenhotep reached out, almost touching her hand before pulling back. "Even this private moment might have watchers. I know enough to be concerned for your safety," he said quietly. "And enough to wonder at the path that brought you here to this garden on this night." She looked up at him fully then. "Protocol forgotten. They told me never to speak of it, never to remember, to forget who I was, and become invisible. And yet you could not." "How does one become invisible when raised to shine?" she asked, an unexpected edge to her voice. I tried, Divine One. For years I tried, but the learning, the languages, the dance, they are as much a part of me as my heart. To deny them would be to die a different kind of death than the one that threatens me. You know you're in danger then. I've always known. She looked out across the water. But I thought I had more time. Ever since your son noticed me at the festival, eyes have followed me everywhere. Questions have been asked. It's only a matter of time before someone remembers my mother's face in mine. Amenhotep felt a cold chill, despite the warm night. You could leave. Tonight. I could arrange safe passage. To where? She interrupted. The Mitanni court, where I would be a pawn in their games, or perhaps to some distant oasis to live out my days in true invisibility. She shook her head. I have tried to accept my fate, but something keeps me here, something I cannot explain. The sound of approaching footsteps silenced them both. Nila immediately rose and moved a respectful distance away, lowering her head and assuming the posture of a servant, attending to a royal whim. Amenhotep's personal guard appeared at the garden entrance. Divine One, forgive the interruption. The Hittite ambassador requests a private audience before retiring. Tell him I will see him tomorrow, Amenhotep replied, irritated by the intrusion. He insists it concerns Princess Tia, Your Majesty. He says the matter cannot wait. The name fell between Amenhotep and Nila like a stone. She glanced up briefly, and in her eyes he saw not jealousy or disappointment, but resignation, as if his impending marriage to a foreign princess was simply another confirmation of her tenuous place in the world. Go, she said softly. A pharaoh's duties never end. We haven't finished our conversation, he insisted. Haven't we? Her smile held a sadness that pierced him more deeply than any ceremonial knife. You have reminded me of what I am, Divine One, and what I can never be. Perhaps that is the kindest gift anyone has given me in years, the gift of truth. Before he could respond, she bowed deeply and backed away, disappearing into the shadows of the garden like a spirit returning to the underworld. Amenhotep stared after her, feeling as though something essential had slipped through his fingers. He had meant to warn her, to protect her, not to deepen the chasm between them. Yet somehow in trying to reach across that divide, he had only made it wider. Your Majesty? The guard prompted. I'm coming, Amenhotep replied, reluctantly rising from the bench. As he walked away, he realized with startling clarity that in this brief midnight conversation, something fundamental had shifted within him. The mysterious servant girl had ceased to be merely an object of curiosity or concern. She had become something far more dangerous. She had become a possibility he could not stop imagining. And as the moon sailed higher above the sleeping palace, Amenhotep knew with grim certainty that neither his mother's ambitions nor the needs of his kingdom would easily extinguish the fragile flame that had been kindled beside the lotus pool tonight, a flame that, unchecked, threatened to consume everything his dynasty had built over generations. Yet even knowing this, he found himself already planning how he might see her again. The great hall of columns buzzed with anticipation. Nobles from across the kingdom had gathered for the announcement feast, the official presentation of Princess Tia to the Egyptian court. Amenhotep sat upon his golden throne, the crook and flail crossed over his chest, his face an expressionless mask, perfected through years of royal training. Beside him, on a slightly lower seat, Prince Neferu fidgeted with the edge of his beaded collar. You might at least pretend to be enjoying yourself, Amenhotep murmured to his son without moving his lips. I'm trying, father, Neferu replied, forcing a smile as another noble approached to offer congratulations on a marriage agreement that wasn't yet finalized. The Hittite delegation sat in a place of honor near the dais, Princess Tia among them. She was beautiful, Amenhotep had to admit, tall and slender with amber eyes and skin like polished cedar. She conducted herself with perfect decorum, graciously accepting the court's attention while revealing nothing of her own thoughts. She would make an excellent queen, a political asset, a diplomatic triumph. And yet, as the evening progressed, Amenhotep found his eyes continually drawn not to his potential bride, but to the edges of the hall, searching for a servant girl with Nile-colored eyes. Looking for someone? Queen Tia asked, suddenly appearing at his side like a materializing deity. Simply ensuring the festivities meet our standards, he replied smoothly. His mother's painted eyebrow arched slightly. Indeed, the Hittite princess seems well pleased at least. Her father's letter indicated she was quite excited by the prospect of becoming Egypt's great royal wife. Amenhotep nodded absently, his attention caught by a flicker of movement near the western entrance. There, serving wine to the visiting dignitaries, was Nile. She moved efficiently through the crowd, head bowed, the perfect picture of subservience. Yet there was a tension in her shoulders, a watchfulness in her manner that hadn't been there before. Prince Neferu had seen her too. His restless fidgeting stilled, and his expression brightened like the horizon at dawn. "The servants seem especially attentive tonight," Queen Tai observed, following her son's gaze, "particularly that one." Before Amenhotep could respond, a commotion erupted at the far end of the hall. A tall nobleman, Nachtmin, commander of the southern garrisons and cousin to the high priest of Amun, was on his feet. Wine spilled across his ceremonial robe, and fury etched into his features. "You dare spill wine on the garment of a sacred officiant?" he bellowed. The hall fell silent, all eyes turning to the scene. Amenhotep felt a cold dread as he saw who stood before the enraged noble. Nile, her serving pitcher clutched in white-knuckled hands. "Forgive me, my lord," she said, her voice steady despite the public humiliation. "My hand slipped." "Your hand slipped," Nachtmin repeated, his tone dangerous. "Or perhaps your attention wandered. Perhaps you were too busy watching the royal dais to attend to your duties." Amenhotep tensed, preparing to intervene, but his mother's hand on his arm held him in place. "Wait," Queen Tai whispered. "Let it play out." Nachtmin circled Nile slowly, like a crocodile considering its prey. "I've been watching you," he said, his voice carrying in the hushed hall. "A simple servant with the posture of a princess, a wine-bearer who reads sacred texts when she thinks no one is looking, a girl from nowhere who speaks the language of diplomats." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Nile remained perfectly still, eyes downcast, though Amenhotep could see the rapid rise and fall of her chest, betraying her fear. "I knew your mother," Nachtmin continued, his voice dropping to a silky purr. "The Mitanni princess promised to the royal house. Such a tragic loss when she died so suddenly." Gasps punctuated the silence. Every eye in the hall darted between Nile and the pharaoh's throne. "Except she didn't die, did she?" Nachtmin pressed. "She fled, with a priest who had forgotten his vows, and they produced a child, a half-breed princess with no kingdom." "That's enough," Amenhotep commanded, rising from his throne. But Nachtmin wasn't finished. He grabbed Nile's chin, forcing her face up for all to see. "Look at her, the image of Princess Meritaten of Mitanni, the very woman who was to cement our alliance with the northern kingdoms before she was stolen away." The Hittite delegation was on its feet now, Princess Tia's face a study in shock and confusion. The Egyptian nobles buzzed like disturbed bees, and even the impassive palace guards shifted uncomfortably at this breach of decorum. "Release her," came a voice, not Amenhotep's, but Prince Neferu's. The young prince had descended from the dais, his hand on the ceremonial dagger at his belt. "Release her now, Nachtmin, or answer to me." "Your Highness defends a servant girl," Nachtmin sneered. "Or perhaps you already knew her secret. Perhaps the royal house has been harboring this living testament to treason." "I said, release her," Neferu repeated, his voice carrying his father's authority despite his youth. Nachtmin's fingers tightened on Nile's jaw. "She belongs in chains, or better yet returned to the Mitanni as proof of their duplicity. Her very existence is an insult to Egypt's honor." "Her existence," came Queen Tia's clear voice as she rose to her full height, "is known to us." A shocked silence fell over the hall. Amenhotep turned to his mother in disbelief. "Indeed," the queen continued, descending the dais steps with regal measure. "Did you think, Nachtmin, that anything occurs within these walls without my knowledge? The daughter of Senenmut and Princess Meritaten has been under royal protection since her father's execution." Nachtmin's hand dropped from Nile's face. "You knew, but why would you allow—" "Because her mother was my friend," Queen Tia said simply, "and because the gods themselves arranged for her return to us." She turned to address the stunned assembly. "Those with wisdom understand that the blood of royalty, even royalty from foreign lands, carries divine blessing. This child was born of love between Egypt and Mitanni. Her presence among us is a sign of the gods' favor, not a cause for shame." Amenhotep watched this unexpected turn with astonishment. His mother, the same woman who had been pressing him to marry Princess Tiaa, was now publicly acknowledging Nile's royal heritage. What game was she playing? The queen approached Nile, who had fallen to her knees in the center of the hall, and gently raised her to her feet. "The time for hiding is over, child," she said, loud enough for all to hear. "Tonight, You reclaim your name, Nefertari, daughter of 2 royal lines blessed by Isis herself. She turned to Amenhotep, her eyes conveying a message he couldn't quite decipher. Isn't that so, my son? Put on the spot with hundreds of eyes upon him, Amenhotep made a split-second decision. Indeed, mother, the Lady Nefertari has been under our protection since her return to Egypt. He descended from the throne and approached Nile, no Nefertari, whose expression reflected the same confusion he felt. When he reached her, he took her trembling hand and raised it to his lips in a gesture of royal recognition that sent another wave of gasps through the assembly. Let all present witness, he proclaimed. This woman is under Pharaoh's personal protection. Any harm that comes to her will be answered as if it were directed at the crown itself. The hall exploded into chaotic discussion. The Hittite delegation huddled in urgent consultation. Nachtmin retreated, his face dark with thwarted rage. And through it all, Nefertari stood in the center of the storm, her hand still clasped in Amenhotep's, her eyes meeting his in a silent question he had no answer for. Queen Tiye clapped her hands, restoring order. "The feast continues," she commanded. "Let us celebrate this joyous revelation." The lost daughter of Mitanni returned to her rightful place in the royal circle. As the musicians hastily resumed playing and the servants hurried to refill wine cups, Amenhotep leaned close to his mother's ear. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "Saving you from yourself," she whispered back, her smile never faltering. "Meet me in the room of mourning in 1 hour. Bring the girl." Before he could question her further, Queen Tiye had glided away, already smoothing ruffled feathers among the Hittite delegation. Princess Tiye sat rigid in her chair, her earlier warmth replaced by calculating assessment as she watched Nefertari with narrowed eyes. Prince Neferu appeared at his father's side. "Father, is it true? You knew who she was all along?" "Not all along," Amenhotep admitted. "But enough." He turned to Nefertari, whose composure was remarkable given the circumstances. "Are you all right?" "I don't know what I am," she replied honestly, her voice so low only the 2 royal men could hear. "For years I've hidden who I am, and now I'm revealed before the entire court without warning." "We'll sort this out," Amenhotep promised. "For now, go with my son. He'll keep you safe until I can speak with the queen." As Neferu led her away, Amenhotep noticed Nachtmin deep in conversation with several nobles, their expressions grim. The commander's revelation had backfired, but the danger hadn't passed. If anything, by elevating Nefertari from servant to recognized royalty, they had made her an even more tempting target for those who might seek to use her as a political pawn. And somewhere in the background of his thoughts, a question nagged at him. Why had his mother, who had been so insistent on the Hittite marriage, suddenly championed the daughter of a Mitanni princess? What was Queen Tiye planning? The answer, he suspected, awaited him in the room of mourning, along with a reckoning he wasn't sure he was prepared to face. The room of mourning lived up to its name, though no sun had yet touched the horizon. Gold leaf adorned every surface, reflecting the lamplight until the chamber seemed to glow from within. This was the place where pharaohs traditionally greeted the new day, where the first prayers were offered to Ra as he began his journey across the sky. It was a sacred space, seldom used for worldly discussions, which was precisely why Queen Tiye had chosen it. She stood at the window overlooking the eastern desert, her profile sharp against the star-scattered sky. When Amenhotep entered, she didn't turn. "Where is the girl?" she asked. "I thought it best she rest after tonight's revelations," Amenhotep replied, closing the heavy door behind him. "Prince Neferu is ensuring her safety." Now the queen did turn, her aged face betraying nothing of her thoughts. "Sit," she commanded, gesturing to one of 2 ebony chairs facing each other in the center of the room. Amenhotep complied, though it galled him to be ordered about like a child. "Would you care to explain what happened tonight, mother? One moment you're pressing me to marry Princess Tiye. The next, you're publicly embracing the daughter of a disgraced priest and a runaway foreign princess." Queen Tiye settled into the opposite chair, arranging her robes with deliberate care. "Politics, my son, is like a game of Senate. Sometimes the winning move appears to be a retreat. Speak plainly. Why did you intervene?" The queen's lips curved in a small, satisfied smile. "Because Nachtmin forced my hand. He thought to use the girl to embarrass the royal house, to imply we were either ignorant of her presence or complicit in harboring her. I simply turned his weapon against him by claiming we knew all along." Amenhotep shook his head. "A dangerous lie." "Is it?" Queen Tiye raised an eyebrow. "I did know who she was. I've known since the day she entered this palace." Amenhotep stared at his mother in shock. And you said nothing? Even when I began making inquiries about her? Especially then. The queen leaned forward. I wanted to see what you would do, how far your curiosity would take you. You were testing me. I was watching you, as I've watched Prince Neferu dance with her at the festival, as I've watched you search for her in every gathering since. Her voice remained calm, but her eyes were sharp as flint. Do you think a mother doesn't notice when her son looks at a woman the way the falcon looks at the sun? Heat rose in Amenhotep's face. You presume too much. Do I? Queen Taya's gaze was unwavering. Then tell me I'm wrong. Tell me you feel nothing for this girl beyond a pharaoh's concern for a subject. Amenhotep opened his mouth to deny it, then closed it again. In this sacred room, where kings communed with gods, a lie would be more than dishonesty. It would be sacrilege. I thought as much, his mother said softly, and that is precisely why I acted tonight. Because if I hadn't, you would have revealed your feelings in some other, less controlled way. And that, my son, would have been disastrous. So instead, you've elevated her to recognized royalty, antagonized the Hittite delegation, and probably started a dozen court conspiracies, Amenhotep said dryly. A masterful solution. Queen Taya actually laughed, a sound so rare that it momentarily startled him. Oh, my son, you still think too small. Yes, I've changed her status, but in doing so, I've changed the game entirely. She rose, moving to a small table where a gold pitcher and 2 cups waited. Pouring wine for them both, she continued, Before tonight, she was a servant, untouchable for a pharaoh except as a passing amusement. Now she is acknowledged royalty with Mitanni blood that gives her diplomatic value. You make her sound like a playing piece, not a person. To most of the court, that's exactly what she is. The queen handed him a cup. Just as you are, just as I am, just as we all are in this grand game of kingdoms. Amenhotep took the wine, but didn't drink. What is your purpose in all this, mother? A day ago you were championing my marriage to Princess Tia, and I still am. Queen Tia returned to her seat. Nothing has changed there. Everything has changed. Amenhotep set down his cup with enough force to spill wine across the inlaid table. You've publicly recognized Nefertari's royal status, while knowing full well that He cut himself off. While knowing you have feelings for her, his mother finished gently. Yes, that is precisely why I did it. You make no sense. Consider this, my son. What happens to a flame when it's brought into the bright sun? It becomes invisible. What was once radiant in darkness now goes unnoticed. Understanding began to dawn. You think by bringing Nefertari into the light of court recognition, your infatuation will fade when confronted with reality, she confirmed. Right now, she is forbidden, mysterious, hidden. Of course such a woman intrigues you. She offers escape from the weight of your responsibilities. But once she becomes just another royal cousin, another diplomatic consideration, what then? Will she still seem so special? Amenhotep felt a flare of anger. You understand nothing of what I feel. Perhaps not, the queen conceded, but I understand what happens when kings follow their hearts instead of their duty. Your grandfather nearly lost this kingdom because he couldn't resist a foreign priestess. Your father expanded our borders, but left our treasuries drained because he measured success in pleasures rather than stability. She leaned forward. I love you too much to watch you make the same mistakes. Before Amenhotep could respond, a soft knock came at the door. At the queen's command, it opened to reveal Nefertari herself, escorted by 2 royal guards. She entered hesitantly, her servant's clothing replaced by a simple white linen gown that marked her new ambiguous status, neither servant nor quite noble. Queen Taya gestured for the guards to wait outside and beckoned Nefertari forward. Come, child, we have matters to discuss. Nefertari approached and knelt gracefully before them both. Your Majesties, honor me with your attention. Rise, Amenhotep said quickly, uncomfortable with her subservience now that her true heritage was known. There's no need for such formality between us. There is every need, Queen Tia corrected firmly. Lady Nefertari may have royal blood, but she must still show proper respect to the living Horus. Nefertari rose, her eyes briefly meeting Amenhotep's, with a look that contained both gratitude and apprehension. He wanted nothing more than to reassure her, but with his mother watching so intently, he maintained his royal reserve. You've caused quite a stir in my court, Queen Taya told her. It was never my intention, great royal wife, Nefertari replied, her composure remarkable despite the circumstances. I came to Thebes seeking only safety and anonymity. Yet you befriended my grandson, caught the eye of my son. The The queen's voice was neutral, betraying nothing of her thoughts. Strange behavior for someone seeking anonymity. Nefertari's chin lifted slightly, a small gesture of defiance that Amenhotep found himself admiring. I didn't seek their attention, Your Majesty. I served as I was instructed to serve. If I showed any exceptional qualities, it was only because I couldn't fully suppress the education I received in the Temple of Isis. Honesty. Good. Queen Tiye nodded approvingly. We'll need that in the days ahead. Mother, Amenhotep interrupted, perhaps we should speak of— Be silent, my son, the queen said, though not unkindly. There are things that must be said between women, without a man's interference, even a pharaoh's. She turned back to Nefertari. You know our situation. The Hittite delegation is insulted. Princess Tiaa feels betrayed, though her father's ambassador assures me they still desire the alliance. Nakhmin and his allies are plotting. What exactly, I don't yet know, but it will not be to your benefit. I understand, Your Majesty. No, I don't think you do. Queen Tiye's voice softened unexpectedly. My son watches you in a way he has never watched any woman. My grandson dances with you under the moon. The court whispers that you've enchanted the royal house with Mitanni magic. Nefertari paled. I would never— Of course you wouldn't. The queen waved her protest away. But perception matters more than truth in politics, and the perception is that you are a threat to Egypt's stability. What would you have me do? Nefertari asked simply. Queen Tiye studied her for a long moment. If I ordered you to leave Thebes tonight, to return to your mother's people or journey to some distant province, would you go? Amenhotep started to object, but his mother silenced him with a look. Nefertari closed her eyes briefly, then opened them with newfound resolution. If that is what is best for Egypt, then yes, I would go, even knowing it might break my son's heart, the queen pressed. Even knowing Prince Neferu would grieve your absence. Even knowing you might never again know the safety of these palace walls. The happiness of two people cannot outweigh the needs of a kingdom, Nefertari replied, her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly. My father forgot that truth and he paid with his life. I have not forgotten. A look of genuine respect crossed Queen Tiye's face. Well answered. She glanced at Amenhotep. You see, my son, she understands duty better than you do. Amenhotep could remain silent no longer. You speak of duty as though it exists in opposition to the heart. What if they are aligned? What if the gods have brought Nefertari to us for a purpose beyond political calculation? The gods, his mother replied coolly, rarely concern themselves with the romantic notions of mortals, even god-kings. She turned back to Nefertari. I will be direct, child. My son must marry Princess Tiaa. The alliance with the Hittites is too important to sacrifice, especially now that rumors of your Mitanni heritage are spreading. The northern kingdoms will be watching closely, wondering if Egypt's loyalty is shifting. I understand, Nefertari said quietly. But, the queen continued, that does not mean you must leave us. Royal courts are complex places. There is room for various arrangements. Amenhotep stared at his mother in disbelief. Are you suggesting— I am suggesting nothing, Queen Tiye cut him off. I am merely acknowledging realities. The Lady Nefertari has royal blood. She could serve at court in many capacities, as a diplomatic representative to the Mitanni perhaps, or as a priestess in one of our temples. Her presence need not interfere with your duties, provided everything is handled with appropriate discretion. She fixed Nefertari with an intense gaze. But you must understand the consequences of remaining here. You will watch the man you love marry another. You will be the subject of endless gossip and speculation. You will face enemies who see you as a threat to their ambitions. Are you prepared for such a life? The question hung in the air between them. A test, Amenhotep realized, as significant as any faced by initiates to the sacred mysteries. Nefertari looked first at the queen, then at Amenhotep, her eyes conveying emotions too complex for words. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I cannot answer that question tonight, Your Majesty. The truth of who I am has only just been revealed to the world, and in many ways to myself as well. I need time to understand what that means before I can decide where I belong. Queen Tiye nodded slowly. A wise response. You have until the new moon, 7 days, to give me your answer. Until then, you will remain under royal protection, neither servant nor noble, but somewhere in between. She rose, signaling the end of the audience. Go now. Rest. The coming days will test us all. As Nefertari bowed and turned to leave, Amenhotep caught her hand. "Whatever you decide," he said softly, "know that you will always have a place in Egypt while I draw breath." A smile touched her lips, sad yet luminous. "Thank you, Divine One." Then she was gone, the door closing behind her with a soft finality. Queen Tai watched her son with a mixture of compassion and exasperation. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be." "No, Mother," Amenhotep replied, suddenly weary. "You're the one complicating matters. A day ago you wanted her gone. Now you suggest she might stay, watching from the sidelines as I marry another. What cruelty drives such a proposal?" "Not cruelty, pragmatism." The Queen placed a hand on his arm. "I've lived long enough to know that passion fades, my son. Political alliances endure. If keeping this girl nearby eases the transition to your necessary marriage, so be it. But make no mistake, marry Princess Tia you must, or risk everything your ancestors built." Amenhotep pulled away from her touch. "And if I refuse? If I choose to follow my heart rather than your political schemes?" For the first time that night, Queen Tia looked genuinely alarmed. "Then you doom us all, yourself, your kingdom, and most certainly the girl you claim to care for." Her voice dropped to an urgent whisper. "Don't you understand? If you reject the Hittite princess for a half-Mitanni servant, you won't just insult one foreign power, you'll incite several. The Mitanni will demand her return as their lost princess. The Hittites will see it as an alliance with their enemies. The nobility will question your judgment. The priests will claim the gods have turned against us. So I should sacrifice my happiness for politics? You should remember who you are." Queen Tia's calm finally cracked. "You are not just a man, Amenhotep. You are Egypt. Your choices affect millions. Your personal desires mean nothing against that responsibility." They stared at each other in tense silence, mother and son, queen and pharaoh, each convinced of their own rightness. Finally, Amenhotep spoke. "7 days, you said. Nefertari has 7 days to decide her fate." He moved toward the door. "Then so do I." "What do you mean?" his mother demanded. He paused at the threshold, the weight of kingship heavy on his shoulders. "I mean, Mother, that by the new moon, I too will have an answer for you, and it may not be the one you wish to hear." As he walked away down the darkened corridor, Amenhotep felt both burdened and strangely liberated. For the first time in his reign, he had challenged his mother's political wisdom, the wisdom that had guided Egypt since before his birth. Whether this defiance would lead to disaster or destiny, not even the gods could yet say. Dawn broke over Thebes in a blaze of amber and gold, the sun god Ra beginning his daily journey across the heavens. But within the royal palace, the new light revealed an unexpected absence. Nefertari was gone. Amenhotep stood in her empty chamber, a small room hastily prepared for her after the revelations at the feast. The bed was untouched, the few possessions she'd been given, a copper mirror, a comb of carved ivory, a small chest for linen garments, remained undisturbed. Only a single item had been left behind, a delicate papyrus flower, clearly crafted by skilled hands, placed in the center of the sleeping mat. "When was she last seen?" Amenhotep demanded, his voice tight with controlled emotion. The guard captain knelt, forehead touching the polished floor. "Shortly after midnight, Divine One. She asked the night servant for water, then dismissed her. When the morning attendant arrived to help her dress, the room was empty." "And the palace gates?" "All guards report their posts were maintained throughout the night," the captain replied. But what?" Amenhotep prompted sharply. "There are other ways out, Your Majesty. The servants' passages, the underground aqueducts, the delivery entrances for the kitchens. If someone knew the palace well enough." "Which she did," Amenhotep finished, remembering that Nefertari had worked in these very halls for months. "Have riders dispatched immediately. Search the city, the river docks, the caravan routes. She can't have gone far." "At once, Divine One." As the captain backed from the room, Prince Neferu appeared in the doorway, his young face drawn with worry. "Is it true she's fled?" Amenhotep nodded grimly, handing his son the papyrus flower. "It would seem so." Neferu turned the delicate creation over in his hands. "But why? She was safe here. You promised her protection." "Safety isn't the same as happiness," Amenhotep replied, moving to the window that overlooked the eastern desert. "And my protection comes with complications." "You mean grandmother's plan to keep her here while you marry Princess Tia?" There was accusation in the prince's voice. "Did you think Nefertari would accept such an arrangement? To watch from the sidelines as you build a life with another woman?" Amenhotep turned to his son in surprise. "You overheard our conversation in the room of mourning. It wasn't a question. But Neferu nodded anyway. I followed her there, concerned for her safety after the feast. I heard everything. Then you understand the impossible position we're all in. I understand that she loves you, Neferu said simply, and that she would rather disappear forever than stand between you and your duty to Egypt. The word struck Amenhotep like a physical blow. He had suspected, hoped even, that Nefertari might share his feelings, but to hear it confirmed so plainly by his son left him momentarily speechless. How can you know that? He finally asked. A sad smile touched Neferu's lips. Because she told me, father. Not in words, perhaps, but in the way she watched you across the banquet hall, in how she spoke your name, in the tears she tried to hide whenever the Hittite princess was mentioned. And this doesn't trouble you? Amenhotep asked carefully, aware of his son's own obvious admiration for Nefertari. Neferu looked down at the papyrus flower. My feelings don't matter. They never have. I'm a prince. My life will follow the same path yours did. Marriages for alliances, children for succession. I've always known this. He offered the flower back to his father. But you're the pharaoh. If anyone could change that pattern, it would be you. Before Amenhotep could respond, Queen Tiye swept into the room, her face taut with controlled anger. So it's true. The girl has run away like a common thief in the night. Not like a thief, Amenhotep corrected. Like someone trying to protect those she cares for. His mother scoffed. A romantic interpretation. I see it differently. She's created a diplomatic crisis and endangered herself in the process. She's trying to remove herself from an impossible situation, Neferu argued. One that you created, grandmother. The queen's eyebrows rose at her grandson's unusually sharp tone. Watch yourself, Neferu. Royal blood doesn't excuse disrespect. Enough, Amenhotep intervened. Arguing amongst ourselves won't find her. I've sent riders to search the city and surrounding areas. Good, Queen Tiye nodded. When she's found, we'll need to contain this quickly. The Hittite delegation is already demanding explanations. Princess Tiye is understandably distressed. By the girl's disappearance, Amenhotep asked skeptically. By the court's fascination with a rival for your attention, his mother corrected. She's not a fool, my son. She sees how you look at the Mitanni girl. Amenhotep paced the small chamber, frustration building within him. Her name is Nefertari, mother, and her disappearance changes nothing about the core issue. I still have a decision to make by the new moon. There is no decision, Queen Tiye insisted. Only duty. Prince Neferu stepped between them. Perhaps we should focus on finding Nefertari first, before arguing about what happens after. Both older royals fell silent, acknowledging the wisdom in the young prince's words. Finally, Queen Tiye spoke again, her voice more measured. You're right, Neferu. Finding her safely is the priority. I'll speak with the temple authorities. If she's seeking sanctuary, they might have information. She turned to leave, then paused. Whatever your feelings, my son, remember that this kingdom depends on your clear judgment. Don't let emotion cloud what must be done. After she departed, Amenhotep sank onto the simple stool beside Nefertari's untouched bed. She's right about one thing. Nefertari's disappearance has created a crisis. The Mitanni will say we drove their princess away. The Hittites will claim we insulted them by elevating a servant to royal status overnight. The nobles will whisper that I can't control my own court. Since when has the living Horus worried about whispers? Neferu asked, a hint of his usual youthful spirit returning. Despite his concern, Amenhotep smiled faintly. Even gods must consider politics, my son. Where do you think she's gone? Neferu asked, moving to the window his father had abandoned. Amenhotep considered the question carefully. Not back to the Mitanni. She knows that would only create more complications. Not to any obvious sanctuary. The temples would be the first place we'd look. She'd want to disappear completely, Neferu theorized. Become someone new again. The trading caravans, Amenhotep realized suddenly. They leave at dawn for the western oases. A woman traveling alone would be noticed, but if she disguised herself, Neferu nodded, excitement building. I'll have the western gates searched immediately. No, Amenhotep rose. I'll go myself. Father, you can't just ride out of the palace unannounced. The court would be in an uproar. Then create a diversion, Amenhotep decided, already moving toward the door. Tell your grandmother I've gone to the temple of Amun to consult the oracles about this matter. That should keep her occupied for a few hours. And the Hittite delegation. Tell Princess tell her I'm prayer purifying myself in preparation for our formal negotiations. He clasped his son's shoulder. "Can I trust you with this, Neferu?" The prince straightened, pride evident in his bearing. "Of course, father." As Amenhotep moved through the secret passageways of the palace, routes he had traversed as a curious child but seldom used as pharaoh, he felt a strange sense of liberation. For once he was acting not as the living Horus, but simply as a man, following his heart rather than the dictates of his position. The western trading gate was bustling when he arrived, disguised in a simple linen kilt and head covering that hid his royal features. Merchants argued over prices, animals brayed and dust swirled in the early morning heat. Caravans were forming, preparing for the journey across the desert to the fertile oases that served as trading posts between Egypt and the lands beyond. Amenhotep moved through the crowd, scanning for any sign of Nefertari. Would she be disguised as a boy, a merchant's wife, a priestess? He cursed the fact that in his haste, he hadn't thought to bring the royal seal that might have compelled the gate guards to share information. Then, across the chaotic forecourt, he saw a flash of familiar movement, a graceful turn of the head that he would have recognized anywhere. Nefertari stood beside a modest caravan of date traders, dressed in the rough garb of a desert traveler, her distinctive eyes hidden beneath a deep hood. Amenhotep pushed through the crowd, his heart pounding with a mixture of relief and urgency. He was mere steps away when she sensed his presence and turned. Their eyes met across the dusty space. Recognition dawned in her face, followed quickly by dismay. She shook her head slightly, a warning or a plea he couldn't tell, before turning to slip away into the crowd. "Nefertari," he called, abandoning caution. Several heads turned at his voice, but she didn't stop. Instead, she moved faster, weaving between merchants and animals toward the open gate where the first caravan was already departing. Amenhotep hastened after her, no longer caring who noticed. He caught her arm just as she reached the threshold of the city. "Please," he said, breathless not from exertion but from the fear of losing her. "Don't go." She kept her face turned away. "You shouldn't be here, Divine One. People will notice." "Let them," he replied, gently turning her to face him. "I've spent my life worrying about who's watching. Not today." Finally, she looked up at him, and the pain in her eyes struck him like a physical blow. "This isn't helping either of us," she whispered. "You have duties, responsibilities, a princess waiting to be your queen." "And what about what I want?" Amenhotep asked. "Doesn't the pharaoh's heart deserve consideration too? Not when it conflicts with Egypt's needs." She tried to pull away, but he held firm. "At least come back to the palace while we sort this out," he pleaded. "Running away solves nothing." "It solves everything," she countered, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Without me there, you'll do your duty. The Hittite alliance will proceed, life will continue as it should. And what of your life? Where will you go? What will you become?" She glanced toward the departing caravan. "Someone new, someone without a past or a name to complicate things. It's what I'm good at, disappearing." "And my son?" Amenhotep asked softly. "Prince Neferu has come to care for you deeply. Would you disappear from his life too without even saying goodbye?" The mention of the prince seemed to shake her resolve. "He deserves better than a friendship that can only bring him pain. He deserves the truth," Amenhotep insisted. "As do I, as do you." The caravan master called a final warning. The last camels were being loaded. In moments, the gates would close behind them for the dangerous journey west. Nefertari looked torn, glancing from Amenhotep to the waiting caravan and back. "I can't bear it," she finally admitted, her voice breaking. "I can't stand in the shadows and watch you marry her. I can't pretend that my heart isn't breaking every time I see you together. Please, if you truly care for me at all, let me go." Amenhotep felt something shift inside him, a certainty crystallizing where doubt had been. "Come back with me," he said. "Not as a servant, not as a political pawn, but as yourself. Give me until the new moon, as my mother said. Let me find a solution that honors both duty and heart." "What solution could possibly exist?" she asked, despair edging her voice. "The politics are unchangeable. Your mother made that very clear. My mother sees the old ways because she helped create them," Amenhotep replied. "But I am pharaoh now. Perhaps it's time for new ways." Hope and fear warred in Nefertari's expression. "You speak dangerously. I speak truthfully." He released her arm, taking a deliberate step back. "I won't force you to return. The choice must be yours, but know this, if you leave now, a part of me leaves with you. A part I'm not sure I can rule without." The caravan master shouted the final call. It was now or never. Nefertari closed her eyes briefly, tears clinging to her lashes. When she opened them again, resolution had replaced uncertainty. 5 days, she said. I'll give you 5 more days, until the new moon. But if there is no solution by then that doesn't require someone's heart to break, I will go, and next time you won't find me. Relief washed through Amenhotep. 5 days, he agreed. Thank you. As they turned back toward the palace, neither noticed the hooded figure watching from the shadows of a merchant's stall, a figure whose clenched fists and rigid posture spoke of rage barely contained. Nachtmin had seen everything, and he was not pleased. Back at the palace, Prince Neferu paced anxiously in his father's private garden. When Amenhotep finally appeared with Nefertari beside him, the young prince's face lit with joy. "You found her!" he exclaimed, rushing forward to clasp Nefertari's hands in his own. "I was so worried." Nefertari smiled weakly. "Forgive me for causing you distress, Your Highness. It was never my intention. You're here now," Neferu said simply. "That's what matters." Amenhotep watched their interaction with mixed emotions. The bond between his son and Nefertari was obvious, a friendship that in another lifetime might have blossomed into something more. Yet circumstances had led them all down a different path, one fraught with complications none of them had sought. "Where is the queen?" he asked. "Still at the Temple of Amun as far as I know," Neferu replied. "The priests are performing elaborate divinations regarding the kingdom's future. It could be hours before she returns." "Good," Amenhotep nodded. "That gives us time to prepare. Nefertari will need better accommodations, something befitting her status but secure from prying eyes." "The eastern wing?" Neferu suggested. "The ambassador's suite is empty now that the Nubian delegation has departed." "Perfect," Amenhotep agreed. "See to it, would you? And perhaps some proper clothing and attendance?" As Neferu hurried off to make arrangements, Amenhotep turned to Nefertari. She looked exhausted, the emotional toll of the past day evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. "Rest now," he told her gently. "We'll speak more later when you've had time to recover." "And Princess Tia?" she asked. "What will you tell her?" "The truth, that a diplomatic matter required my attention this morning." He smiled faintly. "It's not even a lie." Nefertari didn't return his smile. 5 days isn't much time to reshape centuries of tradition, Divine One. "Perhaps not," he acknowledged, "but it's enough time to try." As he watched her follow a servant toward her new quarters, Amenhotep felt the weight of kingship settle once more upon his shoulders. He had bought time, precious days to find a solution that would satisfy both his heart and his kingdom's needs. But deep down he feared Nefertari was right. What solution could possibly exist that wouldn't require someone's heart to break? And if such a choice became inevitable, whose heart would he sacrifice? 3 days passed in tense suspension. Nefertari remained secluded, emerging only for brief garden walks. Amenhotep divided his time between state duties and furtive visits to her chambers. Prince Neferu served as their loyal intermediary, while Queen Ti watched with calculating eyes. On the morning of the 4th day, 1 day before the new moon deadline, Amenhotep sat distracted in council, his mind searching for a solution that would honor both duty and heart. A servant interrupted. "Divine One, Prince Neferu requests your presence immediately in the eastern wing. He says it's urgent." In Nefertari's chambers, Amenhotep found destruction. Furniture shattered, linens torn, blood spattered across the floor. "Gone," Neferu said, his face ashen. "Taken." Whoever did this knew the palace. Amenhotep discovered an ornate dagger near the window. "This belongs to Nachtmin. His family crest is on the blade." Nachtmin? But why would a commander of the royal guard? Because he recognized her mother, the Mitanni princess who fled with priest Senenmut decades ago. Her rejection has festered in him for years. Hidden beneath the overturned bed, Amenhotep found a note in Nefertari's elegant script. "If you're reading this, I'm already gone. Forgive me. Some fates cannot be escaped. Remember me not as I was, but as I might have been in a kinder world." Queen Tia confirmed his suspicions. Nachtmin maintains a hunting lodge near the Valley of the Kings. If he's taken her anywhere within reach, it would be there. High Priest Meripta revealed another layer. When the Mitanni princess came to Egypt, she brought a sacred medallion said to grant divine favor. It disappeared when she fled. Nachtmin believes Nefertari knows its location. Neferu returned with more news. Nachtmin sent a messenger bird to the Mitanni border garrison. He may be planning to sell her to her mother's people, or create a diplomatic incident that would destroy any alliance with the Hittites. Amenhotep's decision was immediate. We cross the river at dusk. I won't delegate her rescue to others. As the sun set, painting the western cliffs blood red, Amenhotep made a silent vow. Before sunrise, he would find her. Whatever the cost, whatever the consequences, he would not fail her now. The hunting lodge perched like a predator bird on the rocky slope, its stone walls gleaming pale in the desert moonlight. 4 guards patrolled the perimeter, silhouettes against the starlit sky. Amenhotep, dressed in simple warrior's garb, surveyed the scene from behind a granite outcropping. Beside him, Prince Neferu and Commander Horemheb awaited his signal. 4 outside, Horemheb whispered, likely more within. We should move quickly, while night still shields us. With practiced hand signals, the commander dispatched his men. They moved like shadows across the barren ground, closing in on the unsuspecting guards. 4 quiet struggles, 4 bodies lowered gently to the sand. Remember, Amenhotep cautioned as they approached the entrance, Nefertari's safety is our priority. Inside, oil lamps cast flickering light across sparse furnishings. 2 more guards fell before they could raise an alarm. Deeper they moved, through narrow corridors until voices drew them toward a chamber at the rear. Matters not what you claim, came Nachtmin's voice, taut with frustration. I know your mother entrusted it to you. The medallion is my right. I've told you the truth, Nefertari replied, her voice strained but unwavering. I know nothing of any medallion. Amenhotep signaled, and they burst through the doorway. Nachtmin spun, sword already drawn, pulling Nefertari against him as shield. Divine One, he sneered, recognition dawning. You dishonor yourself by coming in person. Release her, Amenhotep commanded. So the pharaoh himself comes for a servant girl. Nachtmin's laugh was bitter. How the mighty have fallen. This ends now, Nachtmin. Your treason will not stand. Something shifted in Nachtmin's eyes, calculation replacing rage. Treason. No, Divine One. I serve Egypt more truly than you realize. He tightened his grip on Nefertari. Ask her what she carries. Ask her what power she brings to our enemies. I carry nothing, Nefertari insisted. He deludes himself with old grievances. Lies! Nachtmin shouted. The medallion of Ishtar passes through the female line. Her mother wore it close to her heart, as does she. In that moment of heightened emotion, Nefertari twisted suddenly, driving her elbow into Nachtmin's ribs. He staggered, and she broke free. What happened next occurred in heartbeats. Nachtmin lunged for her. Amenhotep surged forward. Steel flashed in the lamplight. Blood blossomed across white linen. But it wasn't Nefertari who fell. It was Nachtmin, a look of shock spreading across his face as he stared down at the dagger in his chest, his own ceremonial blade, now wielded by Nefertari herself. My father taught me how to defend myself, she said quietly as he crumpled to the floor, before they took him from me. As Horemheb secured the room, Amenhotep gathered Nefertari in his arms. Are you hurt? Only my pride, she whispered, and perhaps my hope that I could leave without causing more chaos. In the commander's hands, Nachtmin's life ebbed away. With his final breath, he stared not at Amenhotep, but at Nefertari. The medallion, he gasped. Egypt needs its protection. Then he was gone, his obsession following him into the afterlife. In the sudden silence, Nefertari's hand moved to her throat, drawing out a simple leather cord hidden beneath her gown. Hanging from it was a small, unadorned stone disc. It was never magical, she said softly. Just a river stone my father gave my mother as a token of love. Amenhotep looked from the simple stone to the dead man on the floor, a life wasted chasing power that never existed. Some men, he said, will believe any tale that justifies their darkness. As they departed the hunting lodge, the eastern sky began to lighten. Dawn was approaching, and with it, the new moon. Their deadline had arrived, but everything had changed. The royal barge glided silently across the Nile as dawn painted the sky in hues of amber and gold. Amenhotep sat beside Nefertari, their shoulders nearly touching as they watched the palace grow larger on the eastern shore. Neither had spoken since leaving the hunting lodge, both wrapped in private thoughts about what lay ahead. Prince Neferu approached, settling on a cushion before them. Father, the palace will be waking soon. We must decide what to tell them about Nachtmin. The truth, Amenhotep replied wearily, that he committed treason against the crown and died for his crimes. And the rest? Neferu glanced meaningfully at Nefertari. I should disappear, she said quietly, as I intended before. Nakhtmin's death will only intensify the whispers. Amenhotep turned to her, taking her hand in full view of the guards and rowers. No more disappearing, no more hiding. His voice carried the weight of a royal decree. I made you a promise to find a solution, and now I have. What solution could possibly exist? She asked, echoing her question from days before. The simplest one. His eyes held hers. I choose you. Neferu inhaled sharply. Father, the Hittite alliance will continue, but not through marriage, Amenhotep finished. Egypt has gold, grain, and trade routes to offer. Princess Tia deserves a husband who cherishes her, not one who looks past her to another. Nefertari shook her head in disbelief. The court will never accept this. The priests, the nobles, they don't need to accept it, Amenhotep said calmly. They only need to obey their pharaoh. As the barge docked, they saw Queen Tia waiting on the pier, her face unreadable. When they disembarked, she stepped forward, eyes taking in Nefertari's disheveled appearance and the subtle possessiveness of her son's hand at the small of Nefertari's back. So you found her, the queen observed, and Nakhtmin will trouble Egypt no more, Amenhotep replied. Something like relief flickered across his mother's face. Good. Come. The Hittite ambassador demands answers. He threatens to depart by midday if you don't appear. Perfect timing, Amenhotep said, surprising her. I have much to tell him. In the private audience chamber, Amenhotep faced the Hittite ambassador alone, his decision crystallized in the night's events. My deepest regrets, ambassador, but I cannot marry Princess Tia, he said without preamble. However, I propose a stronger alliance than marriage could ever forge. Exclusive trade rights through our northern territories and military support against Mitanni incursions. The ambassador's eyes narrowed. And what prompted this remarkable change of heart, divine one? I've received a divine sign, Amenhotep answered simply, one I cannot ignore. Later, as the Hittite delegation prepared their departure, not in anger but in cautious acceptance of the new terms, Amenhotep found Nefertari in the garden where they had first truly spoken. You risked everything, she said softly. For me, not just for you, he replied, drawing near. For us, for the pharaoh who wants to rule with his heart, aligned with his crown. He took her hands in his. I love you, Nefertari. Against all wisdom, against all tradition, I choose you. And I choose you, she whispered, though I never dared dream it possible. As their lips met in the Garden of Secrets, both knew the path ahead would not be easy. The court would resist, the priests would object, foreign powers would question. But in that moment, under the witness of sacred lotus blossoms and ancient stars, a pharaoh and his forbidden love defied generations of tradition to write their own destiny. And somewhere, in the realm beyond, two souls, a disgraced priest and a foreign princess who had once made the same choice, smiled upon their daughter's happiness. The great hall fell silent as Amenhotep entered, resplendent in his ceremonial regalia. The cobra crown gleamed upon his brow, the crook and flail crossed over his chest. Behind him walked Prince Neferu, solemn and straight-backed, every inch the royal heir. The entire court had assembled at the pharaoh's command, nobles in their finest linens, priests with freshly shaved heads, foreign dignitaries adorned with the wealth of distant lands. At the front stood Queen Tia, her face a careful mask that revealed nothing of her thoughts. Amenhotep ascended the dais and turned to face his subjects. For a moment he simply observed them, these power brokers and kingmakers who believed they understood the machinery of empire better than its divine ruler. 3 days ago, he began, his voice carrying to the farthest corners of the hall, a sacred trust was violated. Commander Nakhtmin, blinded by ambition and old grievances, abducted one under our royal protection. For this crime, he has paid with his life. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. The commander's sudden absence had spawned countless rumors, but none had dared voice them openly until now. This treachery has forced us to reconsider many things, Amenhotep continued, including our proposed alliance with the Hittite kingdom. The murmurs grew louder. Princess Tia was conspicuously absent, having departed that morning with her father's delegation. We have offered the Hittites generous trade terms and military cooperation, an alliance stronger and more enduring than any marriage could secure. They have accepted. Vizier A stepped forward, bowing low. Divine One, the court rejoices in your diplomatic wisdom. When shall we expect the announcement of a different royal bride? Amenhotep smiled slightly. That announcement comes now. He raised his hand in a signal to the royal guards at the entrance. "Bring her forward." The massive cedar doors swung open, and Nefertari entered. She wore not the simple dress of a servant, nor the elaborate finery of a foreign princess, but the pristine white sheath of Egypt's own nobility, accented with a single band of royal blue. Her hair was arranged in the traditional style of Egyptian royal women, adorned with a simple circlet of gold. The court erupted in astonished whispers as she walked the length of the hall, her head high, her steps measured and graceful. When she reached the dais, she knelt before the pharaoh in the traditional gesture of loyalty. "Rise," Amenhotep commanded, taking her hand and drawing her to stand beside him. "Nobles of Egypt, priests of our sacred temples, honored guests from distant lands, behold Nefertari, daughter of two royal lines, blessed by Isis, beloved of Amun and my chosen queen." The silence that followed was absolute, a collective shock so profound that even breathing seemed to cease. Then Queen Tai stepped forward, her jeweled collar catching the light as she moved to stand before her son, all eyes fixed on the great royal wife, whose approval or condemnation would sway the court's response. She studied Nefertari for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, to the astonishment of all present, she removed her own royal seal, the emblem of her authority as Egypt's queen, and placed it in Nefertari's hands. "The goddess Hathor herself has guided your path to this throne," she said, loud enough for all to hear. "May you bear its burdens with the same strength with which you have borne your trials." With those words, she bowed, not the token nod of a superior to an inferior, but the formal obeisance due to Egypt's new queen. One by one, following the Queen Mother's example, the court knelt before their pharaoh and his chosen bride. The barriers of tradition had been breached. The impossible had become reality, and as Amenhotep looked upon the woman who would rule beside him, her eyes shining with a light brighter than any royal jewel, he knew that this decision, made against all conventional wisdom, would be remembered as his most inspired act as pharaoh. For once, just once in Egypt's ancient history, love had triumphed over politics. "This cannot stand," High Priest Amenhotep declared to the assembled nobles in their secret meeting. "A servant girl elevated above our noble houses, the pharaoh makes mockery of tradition." "The Queen Mother's support is unexpected," observed Vizier Tumos. "Without her opposition, our position is weakened." "Queen Tiye is a pragmatist," scoffed Perimheb. "The gods, however, are not so easily persuaded." The high priest seized upon this. "The divine order has been violated. Already the Nile runs lower than in seasons past. The gods signal their displeasure." "What do you propose?" asked Tuhmose. "The people can be swayed with signs and portents," the high priest replied. "There are ways to demonstrate that his choice displeases the gods." Meanwhile, Queen Tiye visited Nefertari in her chambers. When they were alone, she spoke candidly. "The high priest gathers support against you. He'll use prophecies, omens, divine signs, all manufactured to undermine you. Why tell me this? You opposed my union with your son." "I opposed what I thought was a passing infatuation," Tiye admitted. "What I've witnessed since has convinced me otherwise. My son loves you truly, and you love Egypt as I do." Later, Prince Neferu warned his father, "The high priest demands that Nefertari pass the traditional tests of a queen before any wedding can proceed." That evening, Amenhotep explained to Nefertari, "Ancient rituals to prove a queen's worthiness. Impossible for anyone not raised from birth for queenship." Nefertari gazed at the stars reflected in the garden pool. "Then I shall become impossible," she said simply. The temple of Isis gleamed in morning light as Amenhotep and Nefertari faced the high priest and his council of judgment. "The first test," he announced coldly. "She must prove her royal lineage." 12 priests and priestesses waited before an ancient papyrus displaying Egyptian and Mitanni royal lines. "Recite your heritage," the high priest demanded. "Prove you are who you claim." Instead of speaking, Nefertari removed her simple stone pendant and pressed it against the temple floor. It cracked open, revealing a hidden compartment containing a tiny scroll and a lock of hair bound with gold thread. "The royal seal of Mitanni!" gasped the oldest priestess. "My mother's pledge to her goddess," Nefertari confirmed, "written in her blood on the day I was born." The high priest examined it, finding no flaws. "This proves your mother's identity, but your father was Senenmut, high priest of Amun," Queen Tiye interrupted, entering unexpectedly. She presented a small ceremonial dagger, his ritual blade marked with his name and divine office. "I kept it, knowing this day might come," the council murmured in shock. The Queen Mother had preserved evidence all along. "The first test is satisfied," Amenhotep declared firmly. "My bride's royal blood is confirmed beyond question." The high priest bowed stiffly, defeated in this first challenge but determined to prevail in those yet to come. The second test loomed at sunset, interpreting sacred hieroglyphs no ordinary person could read. As Nefertari prepared in the temple antechamber, Queen T entered alone. "You passed the first challenge," she said, "but the high priest grows desperate. He's chosen texts even I cannot fully decipher." "Yet, you helped me," Nefertari observed. "Why?" T's facade of royal detachment slipped, revealing unexpected vulnerability. "I once loved a man my family forbade me to have. Unlike you, I lacked the courage to defy them." "You regret your choice?" "I regret nothing. My marriage brought Egypt prosperity and my son the throne." T straightened. "But I've watched you face exile, abduction and scorn without surrendering. Such strength belongs on Egypt's throne." "The priests disagree. The priests fear what they cannot control," T replied. "This final confrontation isn't about your worthiness, it's about their power. Then how do I prevail?" T smiled enigmatically. "Not through knowledge, but through wisdom. The texts they've chosen concern one thing: divine judgment." Nefertari understood. "They expect me to fail on technicality, but they've forgotten the heart of these teachings." When she entered the sacred chamber where Amenhotep waited tensely beside the hostile nobles, Nefertari approached the ancient texts with calm certainty. "These speak not of rigid rules," she declared, "but of balance, ma'at, the divine order that values truth over tradition, compassion over protocol." She met the high priest's gaze directly. "The very principle you've abandoned in your opposition." As shocked whispers swept through the assembly, Queen Ti's silent nod conveyed both approval and a deeper message. The battle wasn't over, but Nefertari had found her true voice as queen. Dawn broke over Thebes as thousands gathered along the avenue of sphinxes. Against all odds, Nefertari had passed the ancient tests. The royal procession emerged from the palace, Amenhotep resplendent in gold, Nefertari adorned with the crown of Egypt's queens. Between them walked Prince Neferu, beaming with pride. The nobles watched stone-faced as the people showered the couple with lotus petals. Queen Tia stood witness as they exchanged sacred vows beneath Amun's temple. "Even the gods bow to true love," whispered an old woman in the crowd as the sun crowned the new royal couple in golden light. In Amun's sanctuary, alone at last, Amenhotep and Nefertari stood before the sacred altar. Their journey, from servant and pharaoh to husband and wife, seemed impossible yet inevitable. "The stars themselves conspired to bring us here," Amenhotep whispered, taking her hands in his. "Not stars," Nefertari smiled, "but hearts strong enough to forge their own destiny." Their kiss, witnessed only by ancient gods, sealed more than a marriage. It marked a new chapter in Egypt's story, where love conquered tradition and courage rewrote history. Outside, the Nile flowed eternal, carrying their legend forward through time. From forbidden glances across a royal garden to a love that changed the course of an ancient kingdom, Amenhotep and Nefertari's story reminds us that even in the most rigid circumstances, the human heart finds its way. Did you find yourself holding your breath when Nakhmin kidnapped Nefertari? Or did tears spring to your eyes when Queen Tia finally revealed her support for the unlikely couple? The courage to defy expectation for love's sake speaks to something timeless in all of us. I'd love to hear which moment touched you most deeply. Was it when Amenhotep declared, "I choose you despite all consequences"? Or perhaps when Nefertari broke open her mother's pendant to reveal her true heritage? Share your thoughts in the comments below. What impossible love have you witnessed or experienced that changed everything? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another heartfelt journey through history's greatest love stories. And if this tale of Egyptian passion moved you, be sure to watch our previous video about star-crossed lovers in ancient Greece. Their story will leave you breathless with both sorrow and hope. Until next time, remember that some loves aren't just written in the stars, they're carved into eternity.